Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4 to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we'll be reviewing the Tier 6 Russian destroyer, Ognevoi. For this review we'll start out with some history, move into analysis, discuss commanders, run down the stats, and then finally finish off with a little bit of gameplay. If you want to skip around at all, I should have set some timecodes up down in the description to help you out. The Project 30, or Ognevoi class of destroyers, was a project that hoped to correct some of the problems with the Project 7 and then Project 7U destroyers that we have in World of Warships as the Ognevoi class destroyer. Those being essentially that they suffered poor seakeeping, a tendency to tear themselves apart at the seams, and if that wasn't problem enough, their engines were unreliable, and that meant the class suffered from significant differences in operational ability between individual ships within the class. The Ognevoi was designed to have a stronger hull, with a higher freeboard, which would hopefully make the ship a little less wet, both from water entering the hull, but also by better protecting the crew from waves splashing over the deck of the ship. This was the first class of ships designed in Russia to have fully enclosed turrets. This would no doubt improve their operational effectiveness considering the sort of climates that the Red Fleet operated in. As you can imagine, the difficulty operating a gun placed in an open turret in the middle of an Arctic winter while being repeatedly hosed down in freezing salt water. The Ognevoi itself was laid down in November 1939. She launched in November 1940, and due to the invasion of Russia, which occurred the following June, would not be completed until March of 1945. The majority of these ships were being built in the Baltic Sea. In the face of the advancing German army, several hulls were destroyed rather than being allowed to be captured. The hull of the Ognevoi was towed from Nikolaev to Sevastopol in August of 1941 for the same reason. It's not exactly obvious whether the Russians were actually doing the Germans a favor with this. Upon completion, the ship still had mechanical issues with their boilers, and the riveted design did not completely fix the problems common to other Russian destroyer classes, that being a tendency to pull themselves apart over time. Now, to take a brief segue, some of you may note the similarity in the turrets between this and the Tashkent. In fact, they're not only similar, but following the Tashkent's sinking in 1942, she was raised from the sea floor, and her guns and turrets were restored and placed upon the Ognevoi herself. Though none of the Project 30 destroyers were ultimately used during World War II, 11 of the ships in the follow-on Project 30K variety, the K here being short for corrected in Russian, obviously, were ultimately completed by the end of 1950, and several of them saw service into the early and mid-1960s. The Ognevoi herself would end her career functionally in 1956 when she was decommissioned, disarmed, and became target ship TSL-2, which probably meant that she was used as a target ship until she was eventually broken up sometime in the 1960s. Her exact fate is a bit difficult to track down in English. The Ognevoi that we see in the game is quite simply a fairly normal destroyer that happens to be Russian. In a way, that means that she's quite special as far as Russian ships are concerned, because of lack of some of the advantages, but also almost all of the disadvantages that a lot of people find to be less than advantageous at best, and quite disastrous at worst, within the Russian destroyer line, are simply not present. Where you'd normally be exceptionally fast with long-range guns, relatively good at starting fires, you instead are actually just a bit slower than average, with neither the number of guns nor the rate of fire to win many gunfights, other than against Japanese destroyers. To your advantage though, her concealment is actually relatively average to good, and her torpedoes are, albeit a bit slow, exceptionally long-ranged, with very low detectability and do decent damage. Adding to her strength there, you actually get a choice between quickly reloading triple launchers and the more slower loading quintuple launchers. And it's a choice where you can actually really go either way on it. It's a great thing about the ship because it gives you some freedom in how you want to play it. And in this case, makes basically no real difference in terms of her overall damage output. Another nice thing about Ognevoi is her turrets aren't glacially slow. They actually rotate about at a pretty average speed. All in all, without any huge strengths or really inconvenient weaknesses, one of the best things that I can say about the Ognevoi overall is that she's one of the most enjoyably average destroyer experiences that you can have at tier 6. Perhaps the largest inconvenience you're likely to run into with this ship is that she's Russian, which means that you have to use a Russian commander. And kind of like with the Benham and the gun-centric American DD captains, none of the commanders really improve your torpedo experience that much, and the Ognevoi does lean distinctly in the direction of being a torpedo ship. So coming to commanders, most of these guys are going to give you more or less the same unremarkable options, at least as far as the Ognevoi is concerned. This means you're likely to take torpedo speed, reload time, and stealth, and then probably also unstoppable. Then the question is really, what do you want and what is it going to cost you? For me, I like to run Filigula because damage reduction is built in automatically. And though you'll have to give up torpedo reload speed in order to get twist and track, knowing the heading of the nearest ship is useful in avoiding disadvantageous encounters with other destroyers, but it also can be a big advantage for your division mates and can even be used to launch stealth torpedoes at unseen enemies who you might guess are advancing along predictable paths. The other choice here is playing with fire, which will probably result in you being a little bit more able to set fires than any other Ognevoi you're likely to face, but considering your overall number and gun performance, this isn't really leaning into your destroyer's strengths and will make winning any knife fight with any other destroyer that much more difficult. If you want to use Anton Gurin, you're going to have to live with the default torpedo speed if you want to pick up any damage reduction. It's not a bad choice, but the most compelling reason you'd use Gurin, in my opinion, is the 4th slot ability Sidestep. If you really want to shoot your guns, then the extra range is really nice, and decreasing the accuracy of the returning fire is also a benefit. The thing about Gurin though is his abilities really tease you towards wanting to use your guns, and specifically AP. And though you do have pretty punchy 130s, doing that with the Ognevoi is probably not the best use of this ship. If you really want to go off-road, then you can use Von Essen, and he certainly does offer you plenty of options to trade. Fire chance for torpedo speed is okay. The reload speed for ship speed is actually not terrible, but there's nothing really here that jumped out at me as a brilliant idea. And his base trait is, again, not likely to be all that useful for you in a destroyer. As we run down the stats, I'm going to talk mostly about the Ognevoi versus the Minsk, which is totally unfair and almost meaningless considering how different those ships are. So I'll also be talking about her versus the average, which is probably a whole lot more useful since she'll fall pretty close to it most of the time. Weighing in with 16,100 hit points, the Ognevoi has pretty good survivability for a destroyer. This is exactly 1,000 hit points more than the Minsk, which itself is on the high side of average. Your 6 to 20 millimeters of armor isn't going to block anything really, which isn't all that surprising. Of course, as a destroyer, you have no torpedo protection, and you should still count on pretty much any metal fish that you take, at least in the center section of your ship, being likely the end of your game. For artillery, you have 2 turrets with 2 130mm guns each. These range out to 10.8 kilometers, which is pretty average for the tier. The Ognevoi does not benefit from the recent improvement to the range of tech tree Russian destroyers, but the enclosed turret rotates at just over 18 seconds compared to the really terrible 30 seconds that you can find on the Minsk. The actual characteristics of the shells that you shoot, being similar 130mm guns, sets fire at the same percentage, but you'll be setting 20% less fire than the Minsk due to the absence of one gun, and most importantly, this does make you somewhat of a below average fire starter, even for a destroyer. Also, being down one gun, you do suffer a similar loss in AP damage potential, though you will find that you have fewer reasons to be close enough to a cruiser to capitalize on this, so the relatively low AP damage per minute is probably not that big of a deal. And not that the Minsk has all that many reasons to want to play in close, she does have some really nasty albeit extremely short-range torpedoes. In a knife fight, she can definitely cut you deep, but the Ognevoi doesn't need to be in a knife fight in order to use her torpedoes effectively. With a range of 10 kilometers, she shares the joint longest torpedo range of any Tier 6 destroyer, alongside the Japanese and the Cossack. However, the speed on these torpedoes is pretty slow, beating out the slowest torpedoes of the tier by only a single knot. If you guessed those would be American torpedoes, then you'd be correct. The detectability of your torpedoes is similar to Americans, so if and when people do see your torpedoes, there isn't actually all that much opportunity to get out of the way. If you hit, your metal fish do fairly average damage at just over 15,000 damage. And all of this is true whether you take the default 2x3 or the alternate 2x5 torpedo layout. The only difference here is if you want to play the quick 55-second reload of the triple launchers, or if you don't mind waiting 92 seconds for a spread of 5 torpedoes. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, with the 2x3 leaning toward the above average torpedo damage per minute the Ognevoi enjoys, and the 2x5 making it a lot harder to actually dodge because the 5 torpedo spread is a pretty tight bunch and actually really nice. In either case, your choice here doesn't change your overall damage potential by enough to even mention it. It's really just a rounding error, really. Maneuverability also marks a pretty considerable difference between the Ognevoi and, frankly, pretty much any other Russian ship. At the tier, currently, destroyers range from 35 to 43 knots before modification. So, at 37, they're on the low side of the scale, but only by about 1 knot below average. Essentially, there are a lot more contenders in the 36 knot range than there are at the 43 knot range. But those 43 knot ships tend to be Russian or French. They also tend to have really big turning circles and very fast rudders. Your turning circle is actually quite tight for a destroyer at this tier, though your rudder shift is a hair on the slow side in Ognevoi. And one of the reasons you might not need as much in the way of maneuverability, or frankly even turret traverse, is that you actually have pretty decent concealment. Compared to most Russian destroyers, you have more than half a kilometer of additional concealment by sea, though you do have the same detectability by air. Since Russian destroyers may as well be the equivalent of highly mobile neon signs advertising the revolution, that isn't exactly saying much, but overall this puts the Ognevoi on the better side of average, and actually makes building her for concealment a pretty decent idea, especially considering her relatively good torpedo armament. Finally, we do come to consumables, but what we have here is not surprising at all. The Ognevoi comes with the smoke screen that you can use 2 times. It deploys for 20 seconds, and the smoke will last not quite a minute and a half. Then you have a speed boost, which increases your speed by 8% for 2 minutes, and after that it will have a 3-minute recharge. Again, you get 2 of those. Regardless of how this compares with the Minsk, this is pretty much the definition of standard destroyer consumables, so nothing exciting and nothing really disappointing here. Alright, now with all of that out of the way, we will go ahead and jump into some gameplay. I will be on Sleeping Giant here, and as you can see, we're just staring at the map as the game starts off. I will go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. As you can see, we are, of course, using Fuligula. I will note that upon testing this, I don't know that there's a lot of reason to use Observant Rage. I actually found myself not using my guns all that much, in part because, of course, they're not all that effective. Also, in part because you just get so much more out of the increased torpedo speed. We are using the 2x5 torpedoes as opposed to the 2x3 torpedoes, so we have a little bit longer reload. That particular launch there, we are trying to play around with the twist and track and hoping to get a little bit lucky. We're not opposed to luck. Skill is nice too, but you know, I've heard luck is better. So we're moving up here towards B. For better or worse, the other destroyer on my team has also decided to challenge B. Probably not globally a great idea for multiple destroyers to go for the same target, but such is life. So we're here. We have a little bit of an aiming problem there. In any case, you can see there's Nagato really far out there. He is not going to get hit by any of those torpedoes for several reasons, one of which is that they're not particularly aimed at him. And they do run out because, of course, what we were aiming at was the Akatsuki, which we finally do see. Here you can see we are putting some shells out there immediately upon seeing him. This is just based off of the relative range of the different ships. The Akatsuki is actually one of the ships that I can actually outgun if I really, really want to. We don't have to worry too much about that because, of course, he's gunned down by our allies. And, of course, he did get a couple of torpedoes off on, it kind of looks like everybody, but we've got 3 coming in towards me. That looks like a widespread, and maybe not the time for a widespread, but we do manage to dodge them in spite of whatever lack of challenge you might associate with that. And at this point, we have actually managed to capture B. Obviously, other than moral support and a couple of volleys of gunfire there, I didn't have a whole lot to do with that. But, you know, I kind of feel like we're in the right area to help. You can see there is a Benson that is coming around. We do zoom in to see exactly where he is. He's coming through that gap, but we can't see him. And as I get my second gun around, you should note that that didn't take forever. It might have taken half of forever, but that is one of the strengths relative to the other Russian destroyers that the Ognevoi enjoys. 18 seconds, it's not great. With the twist and track, it is giving me a little bit more of an edge. But it's, you know, it's okay. Now we are still in B, and we are trying to make sure he doesn't take it away from us because our team has managed to open up an early lead. We have A, B, and C. That kid is a little too close to that Benson, probably. And as it turns out, they end up trading. For the life of me, I can't remember if what I was saying there was sarcastic or true. But in any case, probably more towards the true feeling of happiness that all of the destroyers are dead except for me. That's always a great feeling as a destroyer because, of course, that means, especially with the cap advantage, that we very much control how the rest of the game is going to work. Now, Bismarck is way out there, but because we do have 10-kilometer torpedoes, we have plenty of range in order to try to line up some shots. We do think he is going to accelerate, so we put the first set of torpedoes out there a little bit further in front of him than even the line indicates. And now we're sailing south just to try to keep as much spotting going as physically possible. Kind of looking at that Bismarck. Kind of feeling okay about our torpedo spread. We're looking in there. I, of course, use the non-traditional preset number 2, which does give me a little bit of ability to kind of follow my torpedoes in there. Unfortunately, it looks like he accelerated even more than I expected. We are going to end up landing 2 torpedoes. We do a pretty good amount of damage, really. You can see those both hit for about 13,000. Now that he has burnt his damage control, we are going to put some shells out there on the Bismarck, hoping maybe to start a fire. Now, believe it or not, one extra gun here would probably make a little bit of a difference. Unfortunately, we're getting plenty of hits, but we're not really walking away with anything. And while we're grabbing a little bit of the Bismarck's attention, you can obviously see that our team is losing on the east side. So I'm still kind of into the Bismarck, but I'm not completely oblivious to the fact that the stuff that's going on behind me is not super great for, say, like the long-term success of my team. We are still within the Bismarck's damage control recharge time, so shooting some more shells at him makes sense. Unfortunately, still, I guess you'd say nothing. Well, 36 hits. I'm not sure how many of those came against a destroyer, but we weren't coming away with a lot of love in terms of what was happening with that German battleship. We do have a Synop coming in from the east, and of course I am taking a line towards him that both indicates my interest in killing him, but also is shielding me as much as possible from any premature secondary fire or even the attention of the actual player. Moderating our speed just a little bit to try to kind of get the best possible jump on him that we possibly can. We have arrived here a little early, probably, but now that we're committed, once we're within 3 kilometers, we can pretty much guarantee that this guy is running acquisition. He takes a nice big chunk out of me. I'm getting pretty close. His back turret kicks in. Obviously, all of this is bad news for me, but probably a little bit worse for him, as one load of torpedoes to his broadside is more than enough to finish him off. Sadly, we have sacrificed about 12,000 hit points of our life, but at least according to the map, we shouldn't have a whole lot of challenge to recapture C here. So, kind of like a... That was not a great idea in terms of preserving your hit points, staying in the game for a long time. Probably not a great idea. But we're testing out, how does this ship respond to sort of normal situations that you find yourself in a Russian ship. Honestly, we probably took about what we would expect in any Russian ship. And we more or less came away with what we'd expect with that amount of hit points. I guess we're just proving that suicide boats can always be suicide boats if they really, really want to be. But now that we're in C, you can see to the south we've got this Kutuzov. Over here we've got the Odin. Our torpedoes are kind of homing in on the Odin. We're going to try to slow down here to make sure we don't sail out of this and look like a complete rube in our own video. We managed to do that. Do manage to land one hit on the Odin. She is flooding at this point, and we're, not doing too bad. We got 97,000 hit points worth of damage, and now we're going to try to spot that Odin again. Now the Odin continues to give us points. Because apparently we managed to hit it right about the time it probably least wanted us to do so. Putting another 10 torpedoes out there. As you can see, that just creates an amazing wall of death. That's probably the reason I prefer to run around with the quintuple launcher as opposed to the triple launcher. As well-meaning as my torpedoes are, it does look a little bit like the Odin might just flood to death by the time they get there. He does manage to stop the flooding, and a few seconds later we do finish him off with that load of torpedoes. Now it's 2-2 in terms of caps, and it's 3-2 in terms of overall ships. For better or worse, I have pretty much spent my ability to actually run up on anybody, so at this point I have to play fairly conservatively. And I can tell both that the Kutuzov is going to want to try to get this base, and the Cheshire is also going to want to try to help. Obviously, with just a minute left in the actual game, they are probably not going to make a big difference in terms of who actually ends up winning this game. I do put another 10 torpedoes out there in a big, beautiful line. I find that when you launch in this particular ship, you do get some pretty nice groupings of torpedoes. It doesn't leave a lot of unnatural gaps, just because when you're shooting 5, like, where are you going to go, really? And as we kind of sail on to our victory here, I'm going to start into my final thoughts on the Ognevoi. So the Ognevoi, I should say, is a ship that you can earn as part of the 2020 Halloween event. And in that sense, it's kind of a highlight of 2020, which has been kind of an interesting year. Overall, I'd say the Ognevoi is not a particularly special ship. She's kind of a C+ student, or maybe a little bit better in most every regard, even though she does have a slight weakness in her main battery. This makes the Ognevoi a pretty enjoyable ship to play though, even if it isn't that remarkable. Probably the biggest selling feature of the Ognevoi that you can say is that she can be earned for free if you're watching this as part of the 2020 event. And I will say, and this is entirely a guess, that she's probably going to be a fairly rare ship, as I imagine that the ship won't show up that often for doubloons or for any other currency for that matter. That should make her a bit of a collector's piece, which may or may not be a motivation for you. As for me, I did enjoy my time enough in the Ognevoi to actually earn her through the event, but it is a heck of a grind in order to do that. If you do want to buy her outright, you definitely can, but I think the only way you'd accomplish that is by buying Halloween containers, in which case she's about $150 or $200, and though I can't speak for how you want to spend your money, that is not something that I would do personally. If you do want to earn her through the campaign, pretty good ship. I imagine you won't see too many of them out there, so you can feel a little bit special. And if you really, really like the event, you can get a special camo for her that I will not be able to see. In any case, I hope you have enjoyed this review. Thank you all for watching, of course, and I hope to see you on the next one.